The waves off Malibu were deceptively calm the morning Electra found out she was pregnant. The sunlight that filtered through the blinds painted the room in warm gold, but beneath that calm shimmered a quiet storm that would soon tear through every corner of her life. The test lay on the bathroom counter, its thin blue lines so delicate yet devastating, marking the beginning of something she had never planned for but could no longer ignore. She sat on the cold tiles for a long time, staring at the floor, her mind spiraling through images of Will's face, Luna's ghost, and the suffocating silence that had consumed them since Luna's supposed death. The ocean outside seemed to whisper the same question over and over. What now? For weeks after Luna's disappearance, Malibu had felt haunted. The cliffs still carried the weight of her fall. The sound of her name still drifted through the wind like a curse. Will had tried to move forward, clinging to his work, to routine, to the illusion that stability could save him. Electra had stayed by his side, not as a lover at first, but as a companion trying to hold him together. But proximity breeds emotion, and shared grief blurs boundaries. What began as quiet support had turned into something physical, desperate, a night neither of them had intended to remember, yet could never forget. And now, that night had written itself into her blood. When Electra finally told him, Will didn't speak for what felt like hours. He stood by the window of his father's house, staring at the waves below, his reflection fractured in the glass. The silence between them grew unbearable until Electra's voice trembled out the words she could no longer hold in. I'm pregnant. It was both a confession and a surrender. Will turned slowly, eyes wide not with joy, but confusion, fear, even. The name that hovered unspoken between them was Luna's. She was gone, and yet she was everywhere. Her shadow stretched into every corner of his heart, and Electra could feel it. She wasn't sure which was worse, that he didn't love her enough, or that he still loved someone who might be dead. When the news leaked, it spread through Malibu like wildfire. The Spencers had always been public property, wealth, scandal, and tragedy woven into the tapestry of their name. Paparazzi stationed themselves outside the estate, speculating endlessly about the heir that would carry the Spencer bloodline forward. Katie, ever the matriarchal figure, saw in the pregnancy a form of redemption. This could heal everything, she whispered one afternoon, her voice trembling with cautious hope. A new baby. A new beginning. But Bill didn't share that sentiment. To him, the baby represented vulnerability, a distraction for Will, a weakness to exploit for anyone still watching their family. He doesn't need a family right now, Bill said coldly. He needs to survive. Electra became both cherished and condemned in the same breath. She was seen as the woman who brought light back into Will's life, but also the one who dared to replace Luna. In every interview, every whispered conversation in elite circles, the same question returned. Was Will ever truly free of Luna? Some said Electra's child would live under the shadow of a ghost. Others claimed Luna's spirit had never left Malibu, and that her wrath would fall upon anyone who tried to take her place. Electra tried to ignore the rumors, but they bled into her dreams. She would wake at night hearing the faint sound of waves crashing, followed by a woman's voice, soft, mournful, calling her name. Sometimes she thought it was her mind playing tricks. Other times, she wondered if Luna's ghost had found a way back. As the weeks passed, her pregnancy became both a miracle and a burden. Her body changed faster than she was ready for, and with every heartbeat, she felt both joy and terror. She loved the child already, yet part of her feared what that love might cost. The Spencer house was not built for peace. It was built for power. Everything about it, the marble floors, the sharp glass walls, the endless ocean view, reminded her that here, even innocence could become a weapon. Will tried to be supportive, but his mind was fractured between grief and responsibility. Some days he would sit with his hand on her stomach, silent and lost, whispering things Electra could not hear. Other days, he would vanish into his father's office, chasing leads about Luna's disappearance again, as though her ghost still had more control over his life than the living woman carrying his child. Electra told herself it was understandable. Trauma leaves shadows that don't fade overnight, but deep down, it burned her. She wasn't competing with another woman. She was competing with memory itself. Bill watched all of this from a distance, his face hard as stone. To him, Electra was both a liability and an opportunity. He admired her strength, her composure, but he didn't trust her. The Spencer empire had been threatened too many times by love disguised as loyalty. When Katie suggested that Electra and will move back into the main house, Bill refused. If this family has any chance of staying intact, he said, we do it without distractions. Without sentiment. But Katie, with her characteristic empathy, overruled him in quiet rebellion. She visited Electra often, bringing prenatal vitamins, telling stories of Will's childhood, holding her hand in moments when Will was too lost to do it himself. In those rare moments of kindness, Electra almost believed in safety again. Still, danger crept closer. Someone began sending Electra anonymous letters, typed and signed, each one containing cryptic warnings. The child belongs to the sea. She's watching. History repeats. At first, she dismissed them as the work of obsessive fans or conspiracy theorists feeding on Spencer drama. But then the gifts started arriving, small seashells, strands of hair tied with silk, and once, a pendant shaped like a crescent moon, identical to the one Luna used to wear. The message was unmistakable. Whoever sent them knew everything. Fear became her constant companion. She began to notice details she couldn't explain, the faint scent of Luna's jasmine perfume in the nursery, the sound of footsteps outside her room, the flicker of lights that shouldn't have been on. Will dismissed it as paranoia, but Bill didn't. He ordered extra security, though he told no one. The investigation revealed nothing tangible, only patterns, untraceable emails, burner phones, and a name that kept resurfacing in whispers. Carter. A name that once tied back to Sheila, to old sins the Forrester and Spencer families had tried to bury. As her due date approached, Electra's inner conflict deepened. Every choice she made felt like betrayal, to Luna's memory, to Will's grief, to her own sanity. She wanted to love him freely, but how could she, when every glance in the mirror reminded her that she was living inside someone else's unfinished story? Malibu felt suffocating now, its golden beauty turned claustrophobic. Sometimes she would drive to the cliffs, staring down at the waves, wondering how it must have felt for Luna in those final moments before she fell. Did she feel fear or freedom? Then one night the storm returned. The ocean screamed against the rocks, rain slashing against the windows as if the sea itself wanted to break in. Will had gone to the office to meet Bill, leaving Electra alone in the estate. As thunder rolled, she heard a sound, a soft lullaby, faint but familiar, echoing from the hallway. Her heart froze. She followed it, step by step, down the corridor toward the nursery. The door was ajar. Inside, the mobile above the crib spun slowly though no wind stirred, and written on the wall in red lipstick were 4 words, "She never left you." Electra screamed. Security rushed in, but whoever had been there was gone. Bill arrived moments later, his face drained of color. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It matched Luna's old notes. But that was impossible. Or wasn't it? The DNA evidence from years ago had never fully confirmed her death. The whispers began again. Luna is alive. And if she was, what did she want? Revenge? Her child? Katie begged Electra to leave Malibu, to protect herself and the baby, but Electra refused. Running would mean surrender. Instead, she hired a private investigator of her own, someone outside the Spencer circle. What they uncovered was horrifying, a string of hospital records and offshore files showing the existence of a patient L, who had given birth under duress years ago in a secret facility tied to Sheila Carter's former network. The birth date matched the timeline of Luna's disappearance. Somewhere out there, a child existed, a child who carried both Spencer and Nozawa blood. And if Luna had survived, she might be watching now, ensuring no one replaced her. The knowledge shattered Electra. Every nightmare, every whisper suddenly felt real. She couldn't bring herself to tell Will. Not yet. He was already unraveling, and this truth would destroy him. But secrets have weight, and soon it began to crush her from within. Her pregnancy became complicated. Stress caused fainting spells, exhaustion, and a heart rate that spiked with every unexplained noise. Doctors told her to rest, but rest was impossible when she lived in a house built on ghosts. One afternoon, while Will was away on a business trip, Electra packed a small bag. She stood in front of the mirror, her reflection pale and fragile but determined. She wasn't leaving out of fear, she was leaving to protect her child. She drove north toward Santa Barbara, her phone off, the ocean her only witness. But she didn't make it far. A black SUV followed her for miles, keeping its distance, but never disappearing. When she stopped for gas, it vanished. When she returned to her car, there was a single envelope on the passenger seat. Inside, a photo of her ultrasound circulated with the words, "The sea takes what it's owed." That night, she called Will in tears, confessing everything. The letters, the pendant, the threats. He listened in silence, his voice breaking only once when he said, "We'll fix this. I won't lose you too." But his assurance did little to calm her. The danger wasn't just physical anymore, it was spiritual, generational. The sins of the Spencer, Forrester, Nozawa, and Carter families had woven themselves into a web no one could escape. And now, her child was at its center. As the final weeks approached, Luna's presence, real or imagined, grew stronger. Electra would wake to find the nursery light flickering, or hear the ocean roaring louder than before. Sometimes she swore she could see a woman's shadow by the window, watching, waiting. She began writing letters to her unborn child, letters filled with apologies, hopes, and the desperate plea that he or she would grow up free from all this madness. When labor finally came, it was violent. A storm outside, chaos inside. Katie held her hand, whispering encouragement, while Will stood frozen in the doorway, pale with fear. For hours, Electra fought to bring life into a world drenched in death and rumor. When the baby's first cry filled the room, something in her broke open, not with pain, but with overwhelming love. A boy, with Will's eyes. The doctors declared him healthy, strong. For a moment, everything else disappeared. But just as peace began to settle, a nurse entered the room carrying a sealed envelope. She claimed it had been delivered to the hospital an hour earlier. Inside, a note written in delicate handwriting. "Welcome him to the world for me." There was no signature, but attached to it was a seashell necklace. The same one Luna had once worn. Electra clutched her son tighter, tears streaming down her face. Whether Luna was alive or dead no longer mattered. Her presence was eternal, her shadow carved into the fabric of their lives. The child she held was not just hers or Will's. It was part of a legacy too vast, too haunted, to escape. As the storm outside calmed, Electra looked out the window toward the dark sea. The waves shimmered under moonlight, endless and unknowable. Somewhere out there, she felt, a woman was watching, whispering through the wind, "Protect him. He's ours." And with that, the new chapter of the Spencer family began. Not with peace, but with a promise that love and fear, life and loss, would forever move like the tides, relentless, unending, and bound by the ghosts that refused to drown. The sun over Malibu gleamed like a promise the morning Bill Spencer and Katie Logan decided to remarry, but everyone who knew them understood that in this family, promises were never just words. They were weapons polished to look like hope. The press called it a reunion of redemption, a fairy tale reborn after years of betrayal and heartbreak, the story of two people who had seen the worst of each other and somehow chosen to begin again. But those who lived inside the circle of the Spencer empire knew better. Beneath the white roses, beneath the carefully orchestrated vows, beneath the smooth glimmer of the Pacific, something darker pulsed, a heartbeat of guilt, of silence, of things buried too deep to stay forgotten. This was not a wedding. It was a reckoning disguised as one. Katie stood before the mirror in her dressing room that morning, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the clasp of her necklace. The reflection staring back at her looked serene, radiant even, but her eyes betrayed something else, a quiet awareness that this day was as fragile as glass. She told herself this marriage was about closure, about healing, about family. After all, what better way to honor the chaos that had nearly destroyed them than by promising, once again, to hold it all together? Yet the moment she touched the fabric of her veil, an image surfaced that she couldn't push away. Luna's face, the same woman whose disappearance had torn their world apart and whose ghost still lingered in every conversation, every argument, every whisper of the waves outside. Bill, meanwhile, adjusted his tie with a precision that bordered on obsession. His reflection was harder, colder, the kind of man who rebuilt himself after ruin and called it survival. He had told Katie that this wedding would be a new beginning, that they were stronger than ever, that love forged through fire could withstand anything. But even as he rehearsed his vows in silence, a different voice echoed in his mind, the voice of Luna, pleading for mercy in a prison cell years ago, her eyes wild with betrayal as he signed the papers that stripped her of her rights as a mother. He told himself it had been necessary then, that she was dangerous, unstable, a threat to his son. But now, with the smell of wedding flowers heavy in the air and his own conscience whispering like surf against the shore, he began to wonder whether those justifications were simply convenient lies. Outside, guests arrived under a sky too perfect to trust. The Spencer estate glistened in sunlight, every detail curated for a spectacle of forgiveness. Ivory drapes swaying in the ocean breeze, string quartets playing soft melodies, photographers snapping images of unity reborn. The tabloids would frame it as poetic, a family healing from tragedy, rising above loss. No one would see the fractures hiding under the surface, the quiet tension that rippled through every smile. Will stood beside his father, his expression unreadable. Electra, now visibly pregnant, sat in the front row, her hands folded protectively over her stomach. Her presence was both blessing and reminder, the future of the Spencer line resting in a woman still haunted by the shadow of Luna. When the ceremony began, everything unfolded as it should have. Katie walked down the aisle to gentle applause, the soft murmur of waves harmonizing with the strings. Bill looked at her as though she were the answer to every question he had ever asked. But as he reached for her hand, the wind shifted. Somewhere beyond the manicured lawn, a seagull screamed, and a single envelope drifted across the aisle, landing near Will's feet. He bent down instinctively, frowning as he picked it up. The seal was unmarked, the handwriting elegant, almost delicate. He hesitated before handing it to his father. Bill opened it, his breath catching when he saw the first line. "You promised to protect your family, but who protected me?" The music faltered. Katie's step slowed, her eyes locking with Bill's as the color drained from his face. He tried to keep composure, but the crowd sensed something wrong, the ripple of unease spreading through the air like thunder before the storm. Inside the envelope was a small flash drive. Without speaking, Will motioned to the technician controlling the ceremony screens. Within seconds, the wedding's perfect symmetry shattered as the screens flickered to black, then came to life with a video. At first, it was static. Then Luna appeared, alive, but barely. Her hair was disheveled, her wrists bound. The timestamp on the corner read 2 years prior. The footage showed her in a dimly lit cell, whispering words that sent a chill through the guests. "They said I was unstable," she said, her voice trembling. "They said I was a danger to my child. But what they didn't tell you was that I begged for help. I begged for someone to see me as more than a mistake." The video cut to another frame, guards escorting her down a corridor, doctors watching from behind glass. "I didn't want revenge," Luna continued, tears streaking down her face. "I just wanted to be heard." Katie's bouquet slipped from her hand. Bill's jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed him. He was no longer the man in control of his empire. He was a man being judged in front of everyone he had ever tried to protect. The guests were silent, horrified. The video continued with fragments of medical records, signatures, and court transcripts, documents that painted a picture not of justice, but of manipulation. Decisions Bill and Katie had made out of fear, rationalized as love. Decisions that had condemned Luna to a lifetime of silence. And then came the final blow. The screen showed Luna holding a small child, her face lit by weak sunlight filtering through bars. "If you ever see this," she whispered, "know that I forgave you long before I was free. But forgiveness doesn't erase what was done. Protect your family, Bill. Just remember, I was family too." The image froze there, her eyes locked onto the camera as if staring directly into the soul of every person watching. Then the screen went dark. No one moved. The only sound was the restless ocean beyond the cliffs. Katie turned slowly toward Bill, her face a mask of disbelief and heartbreak. "Tell me this isn't real," she whispered, but he couldn't. His silence said everything. The ceremony was officially over, but something deeper had begun, a moral trial disguised as a wedding. Reporters were escorted out, but the guests lingered, too stunned to leave. Ridge Forrester, sitting in the back, exchanged a glance with Brooke, both of them realizing how deeply their own family's name was entangled in Luna's tragedy. Finn stood frozen near the exit, remembering the medical records he once signed without understanding their weight. Every secret tied to that woman had now resurfaced like bones washed ashore. Inside, Katie locked herself in the dressing room. Her white gown felt heavy, suffocating. In the mirror, she no longer saw a bride. She saw an accomplice. She had convinced herself that taking Luna's child away was for the greater good, that Bill's methods, however brutal, had been necessary to protect Will. But Luna's words pierced through every defense. "I forgave you long before I was free." The forgiveness didn't cleanse her, it condemned her more deeply. She sank to the floor, her tears staining the lace. Bill wandered the empty hall, the applause from earlier replaced by whispers that sounded like judgment. Every decision he had made in the name of power now stood before him like ghosts in fine clothing. He had built an empire on the illusion of control, but Luna's letter had stripped it all away. The moral calculus that had once guided him, protecting one meant sacrificing another, suddenly felt monstrous. Had he protected his family, or had he merely preserved his pride? When Katie finally emerged, she didn't wear her ring. Her face was pale but resolute. "We can't pretend anymore," she said softly. "You didn't protect us, Bill. You protected yourself. And I helped you." Her words were not shouted, but they cut deeper than any accusation. For the first time, Bill couldn't find an answer. That night, after the guests had gone and the estate lay silent, Will found his father sitting alone on the terrace. The ocean glowed under moonlight, indifferent to their turmoil. "She forgave you," Will said quietly. "But can you forgive yourself?" Bill didn't reply. He simply stared at the waves, wondering if redemption was ever possible for a man who built walls higher than his heart. Days later, the footage leaked to the media. The story of Luna's imprisonment, her plea for mercy, her final message, all of it spread like wildfire. The wedding that was meant to symbolize healing became a public inquest into the morality of the powerful. Opinion columns debated whether Bill and Katie's actions were justified or monstrous. Activists called it abuse of power. Others defended them as victims of manipulation. But within the Spencer family, none of that mattered. The damage was already done. Electra, watching from afar, felt the baby move for the first time as the news played on her phone. She turned off the screen, tears blurring her vision. Luna's story was not just a ghost haunting the Spencers, it was a warning. Every generation in this family seemed to repeat the same mistake, calling control love, calling cruelty protection. She vowed her child would not inherit that legacy. Katie retreated from the public eye, her health faltering under the weight of guilt. Bill continued to run Spencer Publications, but his speeches grew hollow, his empire colder. Sometimes, at night, he would replay Luna's video in secret, pausing on her final words, Protect your family. Just remember, I was family too. Each time, it felt like a knife twisting deeper, yet he couldn't stop watching. Months later, a package arrived at the office. No return address. Inside, a flash drive identical to the one from the wedding. Bill hesitated before plugging it in. The screen lit up, revealing a short clip, grainy, shaky, but unmistakable. Luna standing on a cliff, alive, wind whipping through her hair. "You built walls," she said, her voice soft. "But I learned how to walk through them." The video ended there, but the meaning was clear. Luna was no longer a victim. She was free, and somewhere out there, she was still watching. That night, Bill stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean, the same sea that had witnessed every rise and fall of his family. The waves crashed relentlessly, as they always had. In them, he saw Luna's reflection, not as a ghost, but as a truth he could never escape. He had vowed to protect his family, but he finally understood what that vow really meant: love without power, forgiveness without pride, protection without possession. For the first time in years, he whispered her name, not in anger, not in regret, but in acknowledgement. The wind carried it away, scattering it across the waves, where it belonged. The world would remember the Beatty wedding as a scandal, a spectacle of guilt masquerading as love. But for those who lived it, it became something deeper, a reckoning. Every vow they made that day was not a promise to each other, but a confession to the world. They had loved, betrayed, destroyed, and rebuilt, all under the illusion of protection. Now, stripped bare, they faced the question Luna had left behind. Who did you protect, and who did you sacrifice to feel safe? And though the ocean offered no answers, its endless rhythm reminded them of one truth: the tide always returns, bringing with it every secret, every sin, every name whispered into the wind.
Oh.